Before we get started, you and I kind of had a question for them too, so we might as well get that out right now as far as that was around times and days, wasn't it?
Yeah, specifically November 25th. And at the end of the presentation, I was going to, I don't think I can share my screen yet, but we're planning to do some teacher trainings through the Rural Alliance for teachers of your districts that might want to spend, I believe it's 4 sessions with me over the rest of the year. And our first one, we were trying to get off the ground in the month of November. And we were talking about Wednesdays at 10 a.m. because most districts, it seems, Wednesday seems to be the best day. But the first Wednesday we have available is November 25th, which happens to be the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So our question to you is, have a thought about that. Does that make sense? I know a lot of schools, are now taking the entire week of Thanksgiving off. I don't know if your districts are, but I know a lot of districts are. Or will teachers be in the right mindset to do professional development that day? Just something to be thinking about as we kind of go through today's presentation. And I'll wrap up with giving you more details about what those trainings are. But that first training we are looking at maybe being November 25th. And if there's a better date for you, no other Wednesdays are available in my calendar, but if we can move, if it's better to move that to a different day, we can have a conversation about that. So just something to be thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk about that, give you a chance to process, and we can have a conversation about that at the end. And so that's the teachers one. So that would be middle school and high school, where that training is. But Jeff, we're working here just a second on sound. We may ask you to talk to her a little bit. We're just trying to get the right sound.
Yes, you can.
I'm going to share.
So if you could go ahead and say a couple of things.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me here virtually. I wish I was joining you all, but times being what they are, we are where we're at. So, but it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Most of you probably already have heard my story through this last year of just, I don't know how else to explain it, but craziness. Through the Reimagine program, when the ESDs reached out to me and putting together training with all 9 ESDs involved, we've now taken over 10,000 teachers and over 180 school districts supported through the Reimagine Washington trainings to help support distance learning and now the transition into hybrid learning. And tonight, my hope is to share some data with you around that, some ideas we have moving forward, some of the stuff that we are hearing is working, many of the things coming from your districts of teachers that we've talked with. Can I just see if, for those of you in the room, could you raise your hand if you yourself, as part of our admin training, or have you had teachers in our Reimagine training? If I can just kind of see, yeah, good. So maybe about half of you have. It's been an incredible 6 months as far as teacher training and just the growth of educators, the growth of all educators, and learning to do something that was very foreign to us 6 months ago, where nobody even knew this idea of Zoom existed, and now it's become our lives. Is, I just think, part of it. So, but I'm honored to be here. I'm excited to get to spend an hour and a half with you tonight to kick off your conference or your next 2 days. It makes it even easier after a good Seahawks win. So that makes it nice to be able to share this with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get that started with you. If you have a device available, you might want to follow along. Down that URL down at the bottom will give you access to the slides. I will also, here real quick, before I do that, I'll put them over in the chat if anybody's in the chat and wants to follow along in those slides. There you go. But I will give you a second to go there. It's just gg.gg/rule November soup. So NOVSUPT. And that'll get you access to the slides, the information I'm going to have. You can take that back to your districts as we move forward here today. So, but again, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been great working with Kevin the last, whatever it's been now, Kevin, a month. I think we've been in conversations around this and other trainings. I'm excited to, at the end of this talk, I'll talk about some of the other things that Kevin and I have come up with to help support your school districts, your teachers, families, and students. And so we'll talk more about that as we get towards the end and see if anyone would like to join us on a journey for sure. But what we're really going to focus on here are two things. One, the first part of tonight's session is going to be around what are we looking for in schools, especially as we talk about hybrid learning. What I'm finding is most districts at this point are starting to talk about transitioning into a hybrid. Whether that transitioning is happening, already happened, you are preparing for that to happen, or districts now even starting to think about maybe second semester, January sometime, transitioning into bringing more students into school. So I want to focus on what do we see working, how do we want to structure that time, and how setting a structure now is really going to lead into what we believe the future of education is going to look like after this. And we have to start thinking about those things as well. The second part of tonight's presentation is going to be about what are some of the conversations I'm hearing, conversations I've had with the groups here at the Rural Alliance, but also conversations at the state level and at other levels of education across our state. So it's been a real honor to be someone who, much like everybody else in March, all of my contracts that I had with school districts across the US got canceled in March when everybody closed down. Then going on the roller coaster ride that was remote learning and being asked by our state to kind of help lead the professional development charge around that was quite the honor. And it's allowed us to gather a lot of data and just have a lot of conversations at a lot of different levels. And my hope tonight is to give you some of that and just to have us think about how, as school leaders, are we truly really starting to position and think differently about our schools coming out of this? Because for better or for worse, right? For better or for worse, our teachers will be in a different spot. Our kids are going to be in a different spot. Our communities will be in a different spot. And so we have to be ready to take that forward and lead that as community leaders. And here's where I'd like to start is just this idea that what this crisis has done is it's compressed and accelerated trends that would have taken decades to play out. The direction that we are seeing education go in is the direction we were seeing it already. Not the idea that kids would be learning online all the time, but the direction that online learning or learning through devices was going to allow us to do things different. Now, it took a pandemic for us to go completely to the opposite end, which is not good, but we've learned a lot about what works, what doesn't work. We've learned in almost every community, almost every district that I talk with, we can at least point to one or two students where this learning has actually benefited them. We are actually getting reports now, especially from kids who we saw were introverted, actually enjoy learning this way, where kids who are more of your extroverts or kids who are in sports are really struggling. And so we want to think about, as we move out of this, right? What are the things we're going to take with us? How does this transform and transition us into the future of education? And that's really where we're going to be heading tonight. This is a link to the research that we're going to talk about here. This is research that came out from the McKinsey company. I've also put it in the chat there for you if you happen to have access to the chat, or you can go back and look at that later. But this is research that came out the end of August around a framework for remote and hybrid learning amidst the COVID crisis. And it outlines a couple of the things that we know are working and aren't working across the nation and across the world. And one of my favorite parts about this research is that they really took the opportunity to go outside of America. We have to understand that a lot of our educational partners in places like Europe and Asia have been in and out of hybrid or been in and out of, transitioning through remote and hybrid learning more than we have here. And so we've learned a lot about how to manage those transitions. What are some things that work during those transitions? What are some things that don't work during those transitions? And I want to talk about this idea of transitions, because when we talk about going through a transition, whether we transition into a hybrid learning, whatever your hybrid model looks like, or if you have to transition from a hybrid model, let's say that there's an outbreak in your district or in your county and you have to go back to remote, trying to work through that process of transition is really difficult on the entire community. And we are already hearing just through those transitions that every time you transition, so say you're transitioning from fully remote to an A/B hybrid schedule, you're probably going to lose about 2 weeks of learning. It's going to take about 2 to 3 weeks for families, students, and teachers to kind of find the rhythm of learning again. And then if you find yourself in a hybrid situation and you have to go back to remote, your entire community, it takes them about 2 weeks, which is why we want to really make sure that we mitigate how many of those transitions we're going to go through and try to keep those to as much of a minimum as we can, thinking about the health concerns and doing the best we can to get kids back on campus. And this is as school leaders, you are in a no-win situation, about trying to balance all of these needs of people and understanding that every time we transition, there literally is going to be a gap. And so we need to be thinking about the timing of that. If we know that we have to, is there a timing that works best, over a weekend or over a long break, that we can help to mitigate some of that, helping families through a transition, whatever that transition, and wherever you might be going in that transition as you move forward. And so one of the things we want to think about is we've been really focused, on this idea of, well, how do we use our time in Zooms with students to the best of our ability? And this thing that we now call at-home learning or distance learning, the idea that kids are working asynchronous, offline, or online asynchronous, away from the teacher. And as we start to transition into a hybrid, we have to start thinking about, okay, well, what are the things that we're taking with us? And where are we in the transition back to in-person, fully in-person education? And one of my favorite graphics in that McKinsey report that I shared is a graphic that actually shows the different learning experiences that we can set up in schools. And so down at the bottom of this, you'll notice is the full remote, right? Where new assignments and new information are done remotely. Instruction is done, new concepts, new instruction is done remotely. Students' exploration is done remotely. Feedback's done remotely. And then at the very top, you have in person, where all of that is done in person. And then there's these kind of transitions in between as we get there. And here's what we're finding is that most schools are in a situation at some point that the best we can do right now is an asynchronous hybrid. Like we haven't moved that far as on a continuum of getting back in person. And when we talk about asynchronous hybrid, one of the things I like to focus on and help teachers understand is to work out in your schedule, how often are kids actually in school? Now, most of the schedules I'm seeing across the state right now is I'm seeing one of two schedules. I'm either seeing an AM/PM schedule or I'm seeing an AABB schedule. And both of those schedules usually have a Wednesday off. Some schools are doing 4 days and taking a Friday off. But I would say the majority of schools that I'm seeing across our state are either an AABB kind of cohort model, where the A kids are either coming Monday, Tuesday, B kids coming Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, however your district decides to do it. But in any of those models, it's worth standing back and taking a look at how much time are kids actually in school versus how much time are we still doing asynchronous learning. And in an A-B hybrid schedule, what we're seeing right now in the majority of schedules is that we are still spending 60% of our time in an asynchronous learning situation. If students are coming to school 2 out of 5 days a week, they're still spending 60% of their time learning at home. And learning at home or learning asynchronously we can't just ignore that time. We have to be able to use that time to the best of our ability, which means we have to design instruction that allows teachers and allows students to use that time productively. And that's really what I want to talk about is what are the kind of designs that we see need to be working specifically as we start to transition or we're working in this idea of a hybrid situation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to actually look at what are the types of learning that best work in an asynchronous world away from a teacher, and what are the best type of learning experiences that we want students to have in front of a teacher. So this idea that we want to be creating pathways, right? This idea of a learning pathway, a highly structured learning pathway that students can work through on their own is still critically important. We want students to be creating. How are we setting up situations that have students creating along the journey? And there's so many cool ways that you can create both online and offline nowadays that we can't lose this ability to allow kids to stretch themselves and create. We want to set up students to collaborate. There's a lot of different ways that we can get students to collaborate while they're not in front of a teacher. Just because we're not in class doesn't mean we're not connected. There's a lot of different ways that we can get kids to be connected. We are now seeing districts allowing kids to Zoom call another partner or to FaceTime them. The kids have been doing this. They know how to do that. How are we taking advantage of this idea that over 96% of all high school students and middle school students in our state have a cell phone, which means they can all use Zoom, Google Meets, FaceTime? How are we utilizing that? And that's not even including the laptop that schools have given them, right? We want to still be creating instructional videos. Instructional videos are our heavy lift. That is our new concept of teaching. They are a best practice. They are research-based best practice that happened before the pandemic. And we just want to make sure that we are still focused on creating great instructional videos because they work if students are in front of us or if students are at a distance. And then helping students to understand the purpose, right? What's the purpose behind all of this? On the synchronous side, right, when we have students in our classrooms, we want to be focused on community building. We want to be focused on setting the stage for the next learning target. How do we hook students? All the time, I was having a conversation with a bunch of ELA teachers last week, and we're talking all the time. We talk about students that when you're writing, you need to have a hook. Teachers need to have a hook, especially when kids are learning asynchronous. So what's your hook that gets kids interested in learning? We want students to be collaborating and sharing in class. We want students to reflecting on feedback, using all kinds of frameworks that we can use. And then we want to be building that momentum, right? We want to get the momentum going so that we get into a rhythm. So once we take some time to identify what are the best things we want to see when students are away from a teacher and what are the kind of activities we want to see with students in front of a teacher, what we can do then is we can actually break those things down into what we call a learning flow, right? And this is where we want to take the best of those activities and we want to meld them together. So what is it that we are going to spend our face-to-face time doing? And what is it that I want to see students happening in our asynchronous learning time? And around a communication piece, and this is something I think as school leaders, as superintendents, one of the things we have to help parents and our community understand is that when we talk about at-home learning, we are not talking about homework. This isn't extra practice for your child to do after learning addition. This isn't extra practice. This isn't doing a spelling packet. This isn't homework. When we're talking about at-home learning, we're talking about that learning is part of the overall flow of the learning process. Because you see, we understand this and we need to get back to focused on learning. And we know that learning happens in a cycle, right? This isn't new. This is the way learning has always happened. Learning happens in a cycle. And what we have to start to understand and start to face the facts of is that we have to get into a new type of hybrid learning cycle where we're using the best face-to-face and the best of at-home learning. And those things must be tied together. We cannot have students seeing that I do one type of learning over here and another type of learning over here, and they're not connected. We have to support kids in our communities and understanding that what is happening here is vitally important to the educational process. It's not just extra practice. But that also means that parents need to be seeing their children engaged in a different type of work. We can't be telling parents that this isn't homework and then their children are doing worksheets. That doesn't work. That goes against what we're trying to set up here. So if we talk about having a learning cycle, right? In a hybrid world, I'm going to start up here at the top in my face-to-face classroom, and we're going to be focused on learning skills. First and foremost, we need to be teaching the skills of learning. I think it's a gap that we found that we understand that we really weren't teaching kids to learn. We were teaching kids to follow directions. That's what a bell schedule is for, right? A bell schedule is to help kids follow directions. It tells you when you go into class. It tells you when you leave class. It tells you when you're supposed to eat, when you have recess. But what we have to do is we have to focus on the actual skill of learning, and the skill of learning in an age where you have access to the internet. That's a critical skill, and it's a different type of skill. We need to focus on launching that asynchronous time. So setting kids up to be successful when they're not in front of us. Then when students are at home over here on the right, they're going to be working through a highly structured learning pathway. They might be watching instructional videos. Those instructional videos will probably be embedded inside the learning pathway. And we want students to be focused on doing work that they're going to bring back to class for discussion purposes. So this isn't like we're giving them homework that they're going to go do. We're going to come back and we're going to grade. We want students working on work that allows that to drive the learning forward, that when we're back face to face, the teacher has something to do with that work. What's the next step with that work? So this gives us an idea. This is where you give some feedback. You allow kids to reflect. I call it closing the loop, right? You close the loop on learning and you launch the next at-home learning pathway. Now, once we understand that learning happens in a cycle, and again, this isn't new. We all know this. What we've done is we've taken down the idea of learning, the structure of learning. We've taken it down and we break it into its pieces and we say, okay, what are the best pieces that are asynchronous and what are the best pieces face-to-face? And once we start to do that, we can then support teachers in using any type of model inside the learning cycle. So here, for example, we can break down Bloom's taxonomy, something that every teacher knows. Every teacher is comfortable in understanding because we've all heard it, done it, know it. But what I want to do is I want to break it down. And I want to look at, okay, if I'm looking at my curriculum, if I'm going through my curriculum documents, and if the curriculum documents are asking students to do remembering and understanding type of work, well, those are the easiest things to make instructional videos for and to create a pathway for. And so that kind of work is great work for students to be doing asynchronously when they're not in front of me. But as we increase the cognitive load, we want students to be in front of us. And so when it comes to kids starting to apply, students starting to apply that new learning to a new situation, we want that in front of adult. We want to help kids analyze, what did you learn? How did you learn it? Where did you get that from? We want to be able to help students evaluate why they believe what they learned is to be true. And so we want the teacher to be there as we start to move up Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking. The higher the order of thinking, the more educational, the more adult we want in front of the students. And then of course, there's the create at the top. The create at the top can be done in the classroom. But again, we want students to be out there and designing, assembling, constructing, conjuring, developing, formatting, authoring, or investigating on their own. Create something that shows me you now know it. And if we can take something like Bloom's and we can actually look at curriculum documents, we can start to break down what is the best use of my time. Because I will tell you, superintendents, if you are in a hybrid school and you are walking past a classroom where kids are in front of a teacher and they're doing a worksheet, you've got a problem. That is not good use of time. If this pandemic hasn't taught us anything else, it has taught us that the time we have with students in front of us is precious. It is such precious time. How are we engaging kids in higher order skills when there is a professional adult there helping and supporting them through that higher order thinking? And so if we take something like Bloom's, we break it down into its pieces and we can put it inside that learning cycle. So over here, we're going to start on the right-hand side and we're going to start at home learning. And in our at-home learning, the teachers are making learning pathways. They're making instructional videos. Students are working on the very basics of remembering and understanding a new concept. They might start to apply that concept, maybe depending on the topic, the kids. But really, it's those fundamental skills if we're launching a new unit or launching a new idea. And then as students transition into being face-to-face with the teacher can support students through applying that new learning to a new situation, analyzing the information that's been learned, evaluating how to use that information, where to use that information, and then helping kids to create and sending them in their at-home learning. Because remember, 60% of their time is at home. How are you going to create something that shows me that you know and understand what it is you just learned? And then when students come back face-to-face again, we're going to have time to give them feedback. We want kids to critically reflect on what they've learned. Where does this take me next? What's my next step as a learner? And then we can assess them. and then we're going to launch the loop again. So we can take something like Bloom's taxonomy and we break it down and figure out what are the pieces that are best used in what part of the cycle. Now, the cool part is if we work on this idea, if we understand this idea that learning happens in a cycle, you can use any type of cycle inside the loop, right? Inside the learning loop. And so here I've taken an inquiry cycle. This happens to be the design cycle, but it doesn't have to be the design cycle. Maybe you want students to, solve a problem. You're going to use the problem-based cycle. You want a project-based cycle, a challenge-based cycle. The scientific method is a cycle, right? The way we solve mathematical equations is a cycle. So we can take any type of cycle, which is the way humans literally live. We live in a problem cycle world where we're faced with problems and we go through a cycle. And we can take that and deconstruct it and say, okay, what are the best things we're going to do face to face? So here in the middle of this cycle, I've put the design, right? Here's the design cycle. And this is something I'm working on with a teacher right now. I'm working with a CTE teacher, a culinary teacher, high school culinary teacher, where we're taking the design cycle, we're breaking it down, and we're supporting kids. And this is what this looks like right now in this culinary classroom, high school culinary classroom. Students are creating a menu for a restaurant to open in Seattle. So to begin with, in their at-home learning, they need to define and research the problem. So we have set up a structure for students to define what type of menus and what type of food do people want to eat in Seattle. Then we start to research. And what the research is showing is that if you are going to open up a restaurant in Seattle, you better make sure you have dairy-free, vegan, and gluten-free options, right? Now, if you're opening up a restaurant in Washtenaw, maybe don't need to have those. But over here in Seattle, you're gonna need to have those, right? And so kids are starting to research the problems. But see, we set up a collaborative document because if only we lived in a world where you could look at menus online from restaurants in Seattle, if only that world existed. And so students are finding menus online and they're putting them in one document that every kid can see because we're starting to do our research. We're defining what our menu might look like, and each kid is deciding this for themselves. Then students come to class, and in our face-to-face time, we're developing that idea, right? This is analyzing and applying. What is the research telling us? What are you thinking? What are good substitutes for milk? What are good substitutes for butter? What are you seeing in these menus? And we help students design. As we move up the cognitive ladder, we help students face-to-face with a culinary teacher start to develop a plan for their menu. Then at their at-home learning, they start to plan and create a solution. So they start to build their menu. And one of the things we talk about is that every person that comes into your restaurant must be able to find a pathway. So if you have a gluten-free menu, there better be a pathway through your menu from appetizer to dessert that somebody who is looking for gluten-free choices can make. Or dairy-free choices, or maybe you have a meat lover, maybe you have somebody who's more sweet than savory. What are the pathways you're putting through your menu? And they start to create their solution. And then they come back face to face, and in their culinary class, they get to test and evaluate. In other words, they start to make their menu. They're testing whether or not this food actually tastes good. They're evaluating whether or not they believe people will eat it. And if they pass their appetizer, they move on to their main course. If something fails, they go back to doing some research. What worked? What didn't work? And we put the kids back into the cycle again. So that is an actual lesson that we are doing right now at a high school, and how we're using the best of both worlds. Now, teachers use cycles all the time. We just need to be able to take and deconstruct those cycles and figure out, okay, what is the best place for each of these? Knowing that 50% of the time, 40% of the time, 60% of the time, students need to be doing this learning at home. What does that look like? And so we create a structure that allows that, a flow, so that our synchronous time and our asynchronous time, or our face-to-face time and the time students are away, works together. Now, of course, I'm talking about this in a hybrid sense, but we want to see the exact same idea if you were fully remote. If you were still fully remote, you do the exact same thing. We just changed the face-to-face time to your synchronous meeting time. That is what we want to be seeing in the synchronous meetings. And so we create the structure that allows students and teachers in our community to see how learning flows. Because we all learn through a cycle. We live life in cycles. If you're designing a new high school, you go through this exact same cycle. If you have a problem, you go through the problem cycle, right? And we just want to be thinking about what that looks like. And then once we have this idea of a cycle down, if you find yourself, and this would only apply if you're in an A-B cohort, I know, especially at the elementary, we have elementary students in 5 days a week in some cases. But if you find yourself in an A-B cohort, then what we want to do is we want to find these areas of overlap that allow our A and B cohorts to overlap. So this idea of where can you, when you're doing that define and research stage, we have the technology available to set up a shared Google Doc and have all the students put all the menus, regardless if you're in the A or B cohort. We can all put all the information we're finding from all these menus around Seattle and categorize them under Indian food, Thai food, American cuisine, whatever it happens to be. Kids start to organize them. But it doesn't matter what cohort you're in. See, we're gathering research together. We can collaborate across time and space. And in ELA, social studies type settings, we can have peer editing and feedback. So maybe I'm writing my paper and I'm in cohort A, but my editor is in cohort B. Right? So I can find these opportunities to bring my cohorts together for interaction. And where this is all leading, when we talk about the future of education, where this is all leading is this idea of we are headed into an individualized instruction that allows multiple attempts at mastery. And back to my quote that I opened with, this is what we have seen this pandemic do. It has compressed the timeline to where we were headed anyway. We were already headed towards individualized instruction for all students, not just our special ed students. We were already headed that way. And what the pandemic has done is it has sped it up, because every teacher knows how to make instructional videos. And the way that you individualize instruction that allows for multiple attempts is you have to understand the power of being able to clone yourself, which is what instructional videos are. And so if we think about what the future looks like, it looks something like this, right? It looks something like we have these learning loops, these learning cycles that we can set up for students. And if we look at right now, even our face-to-face time, right? We're using that face-to-face time to help plan and launch the loop. We launch the loop, students are in the loop learning. When they come out of the loop, we take this time to reflect, we assess, we see if they've reached mastery. Have they mastered that standard? If they haven't mastered that standard, we set up another learning loop for that same standard. Now, let me walk you through what this might look like if you have 3 students. So let's just say, for example, we'll just use 3 for simplicity reasons. You have 3 students. All 3 students go through a learning loop once. The teacher does some reflection assessment activities, formative and summative feedback, and all of a sudden we notice that the kids didn't master the standard. Fantastic. We set up a second learning loop, learning cycle. Kids go through it. At the end of that, the teacher sees that 2 students have mastered the standard. Those 2 students drop down to standard number 2. The 3rd student gets to go through that learning loop again until they've proven mastery. The 2 students drop down. Now, they go through a learning loop for standard 2. 1 student shows mastery after just 1 time through the learning loop. They drop down to standard 3. The other student needs another trip through the learning loop to master the 2nd standard. And all of a sudden, the teacher has 3 different kids working at 3 different standards and 3 different abilities, which is already happening in our classes. The problem is we're still standing at the front of the room trying to talk to all 30 of them at the same time. That's not what we want to see, because we know the power of instructional videos. Instructional videos are best practice, research-based best practice before the pandemic. And if you are creating amazing instructional videos, you're creating instructional videos, not individually for the kids, but individually for the standards. So as these students drop through the standards, the videos are waiting for them. The learning cycle is there. And each kid is working at their own pace. And we're allowing multiple attempts for students to be successful. Now that's a different way of looking at it. It's a different way of teaching. And in many cases, especially our elementary, when I show this to elementary teachers, they're like, yes, that's what we do. When I show this to high school teachers, they're like, there's no way I can do this, right? It's very fascinating how we move from one end to the other end of the spectrum. But we're going to have to find ways that we can utilize the technology that teachers have, the new technology skills that teachers are bringing back with them, and this understanding of where education is headed, especially in our state where we're looking at multiple pathways to graduation. If we're looking at multiple pathways to graduation, we have to be looking at multiple pathways to success in our classroom. What does that look like? How am I going to structure that for students? Right? And here's a couple of the things we need to rethink, or we're going to be having to rethink here very soon. And the first thing is to understand you can't pace personalized learning. We talk all the time about moving to a personalized learning environment, personalizing education for each student. The problem is, if you're going to personalize education, you can't pace it. You see, pacing guides are a 20th century idea of curriculum design that does not transfer to a connected world. It is not culturally responsive. It is not what's best for kids. Focusing on standards-based grading and personalized instruction for all students is the future of education. And we need to start thinking that way as we start bringing students back to our campuses. Now, right now, our state has 7 pathways to graduation, but there are more coming. There are going to be more ways, more individualized, personalized ways for students to be able to graduate from our high schools. And the real transition we're in right now, the heavy lift, and the reason why we're feeling so much pressure is really what is happening is we are in one of the greatest times of change in educational history. We are actually changing from a content-based educational system to a skill-based educational system. We are moving away from this idea that you have to know content and moving towards this idea that no, the content is out there. If you have access, if you have a computer, if you have internet access, then what is missing is the skills in order to find the content the moment you need to know it. And we're not here yet, but this is the transition we're going through. It's the same reason why at the state level, they're working on funding a connection and laptop for every child across our state. Every student needs to have internet access and access to a computer in order to learn in 2020 and beyond. And we're looking at it to become part of basic education funding in the state of Washington. Now, if we do that, we're not there yet, but when we do that, we switch the system because the content's out there. It's, do you have the skills to apply that content the moment you need it? And what I'm thinking about right now is I'm in the process of refinancing my house. And in the process of refinancing my house, I don't need to know the content of how a mortgage calculator works. I just go to Google and I type in mortgage calculator. But I do need to know what an interest rate is. I do need to understand what a down payment is, right? I need to have the skills to use the calculator. I don't need to know I just need to know what calculator I need. That's a skill. And I need to know what numbers I put where to make the calculator work. The content of actually understanding how it all goes together, I just need to know how to access it. And we're becoming a skills-based system. And how are we focusing on those skills? And we are still seeing today, the work that I am still doing with teachers today, is we are seeing this play out, that there is a skill gap with our students who do not know how to learn online. They do not, we're 7 and 8 weeks into this. And I had a teacher, a 7th grade teacher the other day, spend an entire lesson on teaching 7th graders how to check their email. You see, that's a skill. How do you check your email? How do you accept a calendar invite? Those are critical skills in 2020 and beyond, no matter what your age. There's a skill gap. Part of the reason that we are having a hard time seeing engagement in our at-home learning is because I believe that a lot of our kids don't have the skills to even know how to access that learning, do that learning, when they're not in front of a teacher, One of the greatest skills we can teach students right now. How do you learn when the boss isn't standing in front of you? How do you learn when the boss isn't standing in front of you? One of the greatest skills that a teacher needs to learn. How do I engage kids when I'm not standing in front of them? How am I a leader when my people aren't in front of me? It's a different skill set. And there's skills we can work on. I'm hearing this from teachers right now. Right now, the biggest complaint I'm hearing from teachers is kids won't engage. How do you get engagement in asynchronous learning? My first question every single time is, well, what are you asking kids to do? Is it engaging? Well, what do you mean? Well, what you're asking kids to do, is it engaging or is it a worksheet? Because if it's a worksheet, it's not engaging. If you're sending home worksheets, if you're asking kids to do the same type of work they would have done when their boss was standing in front of them and could stand in the doorway and say, you can't go play with your friends until you're done, you're not going to see engagement. Because if you're asking them to do the same type of work and you're asking a 13-year-old mind to make a determination between doing schoolwork that is boring and not engaging or going and playing Fortnite, who wins every single time? And if you don't have the skills of how to learn, how to work when the boss isn't standing in front of you, you're struggling right now. You're struggling right now. What this also means is that this is an amazing opportunity for us to really dig deep into our grading systems and our grading policies. And what do our grading policies actually tell kids? For years now in education, we've been talking about this idea of a growth mindset, but our grading system does not match the words we speak. Most grading systems have students believing that success and failure are opposite ends of the spectrum. That failure, literally, F actually means failure, right? But see, that's not a growth mindset. See, a growth mindset isn't that failure and success are at odds with each other. A growth mindset is believing that failure is everything that happens right before you succeed. And fear is the opposite of success. Never trying is the opposite of success. How many students do we have right now in our system who aren't even trying because why should I try? I'm going to get an F anyway. And we've all heard kids say that. And see, that's fear talking. Why even try if I'm going to fail anyway? But if we're grading in a system that doesn't understand that failure is everything you do before success, then we need to change a grading policy. We need to change the way we grade. If a student gets an F at the beginning of the semester and they ace the final, they should not get a C for the course. If students get an F and then they have an A on the final, you get an A. That's called learning. How are we restructuring our idea of what it means to learn within this idea that we keep preaching around having a growth mindset, about being a lifelong learner? Are we changing our grading systems? Are we changing the way? Are we giving kids multiple attempts to fail their way to success? And the best part is there are stories all around us that we can show of people failing their way to success. My favorite story to tell students, I'm doing a student summit here in hopefully in a couple weeks with students of your school districts. But one of my favorite stories to tell right now is the story of Elon Musk. Whether you like him or hate him, the guy has failed his way to success. He's blown up more rockets than any person. He blew up rockets until he figured out how to get men launched from American soil back to the International Space Station. He failed his way to success. There's stories like this all over the place. As a school system right now, are you embracing this idea? Are you trying new things? Are we innovating? Are we failing our way to success? Or are we stuck in a fear mode where we don't know what to do, so we're not going to try anyway? A lot of times when I'm working with districts and we get to this idea of grading, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's so hard. Yeah, it is hard. It's a hard policy to change. It's a hard mindset to change. But if you get stuck in the fear of ever trying to change it, because the first time you try to change it, you're probably going to fail at it until we succeed. It's called being a lifelong learner. What we say we are supposed to be preparing kids for, right? College, career, and life. And we have an opportunity because the world changed on us. And we need to be thinking through, as we continue to slowly find our way back to whatever new normal is going to be, how do we make sure we're taking advantage of the time we have right now? Because things changed just since this started. And the change was already coming, remember. So I love this. This is right before we close down, right? So this is December 11th, 2019, right before the close down, a couple months before the close down. New research had just come out to show that 35% of undergraduates in colleges, universities, and community colleges were taking at least one online course. That means students that you graduated in 2019, 1 out of every 3 of them is taking at least one online course right now, or their first year of university. Were they prepared? And we are starting to gather data because we saw what happened was we saw a gap. We saw a gap where universities had this expectation that students knew how to learn online, and K-12 education still was not preparing kids to do that. And we are hearing stories, and we're starting to get some research from the universities in our state around this idea that students who are struggling the most in their first year or 2 of university are students who do not know how to learn online. And by learning online, I'm talking about, do you know how to download your work from someplace like Google Classroom? Do you know how to upload your work to something like Canvas? Do you know how to hold an online discussion? So even before the pandemic, we had to be thinking about how were we preparing students to learn in an online world. And of course, after the pandemic, it's going to be a new way of just going to school. You're still going to go to person, but you maybe not all your classes, because maybe the professor lives somewhere else, the class you really want to take. And see, all of a sudden, things got compressed. The University of California system, on May 21st, the entire university system of California, public university system of California, dropped ACT and SAT as requirements for application starting this school year. That was on May 21st. And less than a month later, sorry, clicked on the wrong thing. All right. On June 11th, the University of Washington comes out and says the same thing. And every public university in our state follows suit. That starting this next coming fall, all students who are applying right now to the University of Washington, WSU, they've removed standardized testing requirements for the incoming class. And they're transitioning to a new system. And that new system is going to be a portfolio, right? It's going to be a creation of a portfolio system to evaluate scores. Get this, they're assessing higher order thinking skills, communication skills, and the capacity for intellectual growth. So a new graduation requirement, superintendents, do your seniors graduate with a portfolio that shows that they have higher order thinking skills, their communication skills, and their capacity for intellectual growth? And here's my favorite part about this. I don't care if you're a kid that's going into college. I don't care if you're a kid that's going into careers. I don't care if you're a kid going into life. Having a portfolio will suit you well. It will suit you well. Maybe that's a new graduation requirement. Maybe you already have it. If you do, congratulations, you're ahead of the curve. If not, where does that fit? And then how do we scaffold that down? So we have students in kindergarten, first, second grade, starting to create portfolios, understanding how to reflect on their learning, understanding they have multiple attempts and they can show their multiple attempts to mastery over a grade period, over 3 grade periods. Most curriculums now spiral. So there's this opportunity now that I could be in 7th grade and I can look back and still learn from my stuff in 4th grade, because we don't keep things in paper. We keep things digital. You can't walk around with 12 years of paper portfolio, but you can sure walk around with 12 years of a digital portfolio. What might that look like? And how are we preparing for the future these kids are going into? In July, a study came out and found that 82% of business leaders say their organizations plan to let employees to continue to work at home at least part of the time. With almost 50%, 47%, plan to allow employees to work from home permanently. Are we preparing students for their future, not our past? Are we helping and supporting students and learn and teach them, how do you work when the boss isn't standing in front of you? That might be the best skill we're teaching kids right now. And it's a struggle because nobody's ever done it before. Nobody's ever taught it before. We're learning on the fly. But if 50% of your kids might never set foot in an actual office, are we preparing kids with those skills? How do you create a schedule? How do you create an atmosphere for working at home? What would that look like? And as many of you have probably already read, July is the new January, as more companies, everyone from Ford to Microsoft, has now delayed workers coming back into the office buildings until July at the earliest, some beyond that. We have a couple companies over here in Seattle who have said they're shut down for all of 2021. People are going to be working from home. It's a new skill set. And see, our entire economy is changing. A new paper that was published by the National Bureau of Economic Research shows that 42% of those laid off won't get their job back. And their key word there is their job. That job that they lost is not coming back for a host of reasons. The number one reason that job's not coming back, automation. We were already headed this way. We just got condensed, compressed, and sped up. And the organization I love looking at right now is McDonald's. McDonald's, through its lifetime, has employed 1 out of every 8 Americans has worked for McDonald's. Now, I want you to think about that from an economic sense. 1 out of every 8 Americans has worked for McDonald's. And during the pandemic, McDonald's has sped up its transition into automating their restaurants so that machines and robots are now cooking your fries and flipping your burgers. And if you've been to a recent McDonald's, you've probably noticed they have a kiosk. You do the ordering yourself. They only have 2, maybe 3 people working in the entire store. And part of that is because the research that they did showed that people still want somebody, when they walk into a store, they still want a human to say, "Welcome to McDonald's. How may I help you?" But there aren't 8 people. There aren't 10 people, and there never will be again. You probably just have to go look at your local supermarket. The local supermarkets around me, as I watch, we have more and more self-checkout lines and less checkout clerks. Automation that was already coming gets sped up. But see, the jobs are still out there. And how you get those jobs has changed. And so we have to understand in 2020 and beyond, the way you get hired is not the way we got hired. There's this website called LinkedIn that in 2018, 94% of all hirees across America had some LinkedIn connection, some kind of connection in this incredible, rich, professional social network called LinkedIn. 94% in 2018. And because this is how you get hired today. And I want you to be thinking for your middle school and high school students, what is it that we need to be teaching them that if they're going into life or careers straight out of high school, they need to understand that you need to have a LinkedIn profile. Oh, the age to start a LinkedIn profile, 16. Every 16-year-old in ELA class should set up a LinkedIn profile because that's where you build a resume. It's where you can write a personal narrative. And the way you get hired today is a company finds you in LinkedIn. You then do a social media background check. So again, this is where we go into middle school and we help support kids understanding your social media says something about you. They do a social media background check on you. And now they have enough information between your resume and LinkedIn and your social media that they do a Google search for you. They see what comes up on a Google search. They see what's out there written about you. And we have to understand that these are 3 interviews that you didn't even know were happening before they ever ask for your paper resume. You have to clear 3 interviews that you don't even know are happening before you ever get asked for your paper resume. And I asked you to reflect. Of those 4 interviews, which ones are you preparing kids to pass as we head into 2020 and beyond? And I'll tell you, out of the 4, the paper one's the easiest. I can teach any kid it in about 3 seconds. It goes like this. You go file, new from template, you pick the pretty one and you fill in the blanks. But these other 3, they take time. And they take work to hone your connections, to understand how to utilize your social connections and your social networks, to make sure that you own your search results before you ever get asked about the paper copy. Because you see, the jobs are out there. We are in a time period where unemployment is at an all-time high. And I took this screenshot at 5:15 tonight. At 5:15 tonight, there are over 79,000 job openings in our state. This is just our state. But see, the jobs are not the jobs that they used to be. And a couple of the new jobs that are really starting to bubble up to the surface is this idea of infographics, right? If you do a search inside Washington State for the word infographic, there are 45 jobs. And infographics are where you take data and you visually represent it so people can understand it, right? It's visually representing data. I need a new class in middle school, high school. I need a class that is art and math together. I need a class where students are looking at large sets of data and they are able to artistically define what I'm seeing. Starting salary in this state, $92,000. Do you have a class that puts art and math together? Jobs of the future. How about this one? Drones. 61 job openings right now for drones, drone pilots, right? Starting from $32 an hour, all over the state of Washington, flying drones, everything from cattle ranchers, farmers, marine biologists are looking for drone pilots. The use of them, especially during wildfire season, you read incredible stories about 17-year-olds going out and flying drones to find cattle that have been lost up in the hills after wildfires. Getting paid a lot of money at 17. Oh, by the way, what do you need to be a drone pilot? An online certificate that costs you about $100. So maybe you have kids. Do you have a drone program at your school? If not, maybe you need to make one. Or how about this? Type in the word YouTube. I hear a lot from principals, superintendents, teachers, parents, that when they ask their kid when they grow up, what do you want to be? Their students say, I want to be a YouTuber. And why wouldn't you be a YouTuber? Last year, the #1 YouTuber was 9 years old and he made $27 million. So of course you want to be a YouTuber when you grow up, right? And it's not about YouTube. It's about creating videos, being able to create video content. Starting salary in this state, $102,000. Education, high school diploma. All you need to know is, do you know how to create a community around video content? And if you're going to make a video, you better know how to write a script. There's ELA. If you're going to make a video, you better understand lighting and audio. There's science. Maybe it's time for us to invite student culture into our schools instead of trying to block it at every turn. And I truly believe this is a moment in education, right? Against a backdrop of 2 centuries of faster and faster transformation, it has compressed and further accelerated the arc of change. The internet was already here. These tools were already here. None of the tools that we have used during the pandemic all of a sudden popped up because of the pandemic. They were all here. They were already being utilized in small pockets. We just happen to all have to pay attention. And how are we seizing this moment to understand that every one of your teachers is always going to know how to do a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet? How do we understand that when we come back to school, we can always utilize a chat room where we are hearing more and more from teachers that students are opening up in the chat room when they will not turn their camera on? They will not turn their camera on. They will not talk. But if a good teacher knows how to engage kids in the chat room, the thing that we blocked in schools, we're seeing engagement. We're seeing kids reach out to teachers. We're seeing communities form. Because you see, a chat room is a lot like text messaging, and we invite student culture into our schools. And what happened, and where we're at right now, is on March 16th, the day before school shut down, this is what we understood literacy to be. We were still based on a print literacy system. We were focused on teaching students print literacy. We were starting to talk about this idea of digital literacy, but very few schools were spending time on this idea of network literacy. How do you learn on a network? And then on March 17th, the entire triangle switched. And all of a sudden, we needed to understand network literacy at a very deep level. All the little clicks it takes to get into a Zoom or a Google Meet, all the little clicks it takes to get into Google Classroom. And nobody had taught those. And we're still struggling and finding the gaps of a new networked literacy world. But here's the issue. You see, we live in a networked world. The network's not going away after the pandemic's over. What if this is forever the triangle of literacies we teach in school? You see, in kindergarten, we have to understand that the average child in America touches a connected device for the first time at age 2. So maybe as we're teaching the ABCs, we also need to be teaching the keyboard. And you want to confuse a kindergartner, tell them that the alphabet goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but your keyboard that you're used to goes A, S, D, F, G, H, I. I can see us, we're rewriting the alphabet song for a generation. And we might need to focus on network literacy for a while. How do you search? How do you learn to trust Wikipedia and not say that it's this horrible thing? Because I can't find a school that's still buying sets of encyclopedias. And then what replaced it's this thing called Wikipedia. And then we tell kids don't trust it. And it can be trusted, by the way. It's been shown over and over again to be better than the textbooks we're still spending money on. You just don't know how to use it. And maybe we're finally going to understand that I would say the majority of us, overwhelming majority of us, probably read more information on the network than we do print today. And I'm not saying that print's not important. Please don't hear that. Print is important, but we have to understand that there's different literacies. And the best part is our state already has standards for it. And this has been my message the last 3 weeks, well, probably more closer to 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks with teachers is I'm hearing teachers talk about all this time they're wasting teaching kids about Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams, or they're like, I waste so much class time just getting kids in. Well, maybe you're not wasting time. Maybe those are the skills we're supposed to be teaching right now. And here's the best part. You have state standards that you could be teaching to. I just pulled out a couple. And what I love most about our state is our state has even gone in and they've taken these network literacy skills and they've actually paired them with standards in our curriculum. So here's a K2 one. With guidance from an educator, students consider and set personal learning goals and utilize appropriate technologies that will demonstrate knowledge and reflection of the process. Oh, by the way, that is also ELA writing goal 6. Or how about 3rd and 5th grade? Students collaborate with the teacher to employ appropriate research techniques to locate digital resources that help them in their learning process. Oh, by the way, that hits 2 other ELA standards. Or how about here for 6-8? Or how about these science standards that you can cover in high school? And I just literally went into the documents and said, look what you're teaching kids. Students select and use digital tools to plan and manage the design process that considers design constraints and calculates risks. Oh, by the way, that's also science standard 2. You see, maybe what we're supposed to be doing right now is teaching kids these skills. Maybe we're just looking at them through the wrong lens. We're seeing it as wasted time because we still are thinking in a print literacy world, and we haven't made the true connection to we are moving from content-based to skills-based, and there's a new set of literacies that we must be teaching, and we must be teaching it to all kids. And we're teaching it. We just feel like we're wasting time when we do it. How do we change that mindset with teachers? How do we understand that what we're doing right now is utilizing an incredible moment in time to give kids a set of skills that is probably going to set them up for their future? We just don't see it yet. And to wrap up, I wanted to share with you the trends that I am seeing and are starting to bubble in conversations across this state. Again, working with over 180 school districts across this state in all different types of capacities. There's just different conversations I had, and I'm starting to see some things bubble in conversations. And my hope is after tonight, as you go into tomorrow, that you get to talk about what conversations are you hearing? What are conversations happening in your community? So here are some of the conversations that I'm hearing right now, right? I'm hearing conversations around student connectivity being funded by basic education. Are we ready for that? And that's going to come with a whole new host of things for us as public education schools, school districts, to have to deal with. Schools could play a vital role in communities in supporting internet for all families. I want you to think about that for a second. Not only are you going to be serving lunches and breakfast, but you might also have to be serving the internet provider. You might be the internet provider for families in your community. We are starting to see, especially in rural school districts, where having a wired connection is very difficult. We are starting to see schools reach out and create partnerships with satellite internet companies. If you've been following, once again, Elon Musk and his Starlink, he's about ready to turn it on. And the state of Washington is one of the first places that'll have access to satellite internet. If I was a superintendent of a rural school right now, I would be on that website asking for beta access. What would that look like for you, for your families, for your community? And we're already seeing that it works. There's already 3 cases in the state of Washington where they've got early access, and it is changing communities. So satellite is the future. Are we reaching out and starting to think about partnerships? The idea of schools being one-to-one has been accelerated because most schools already are, right? The laptop is out of the cart and it's not going back. We need to be thinking about how we're turning all of those carts, especially in elementary school that you might have had, into charging stations. As kindergartners bring their laptop back and forth home to school, even as we get back to full in person. We're still going to have carts because we're going to need a place to charge them. But we got to think differently of what that cart looks like. And we're all going to be one-to-one when this is over. We're going to see a trend, I believe, where communities rely on public education to fund a laptop. Parents will fund the phone. And all of a sudden, we're going to find ourselves where we were trying to get to this idea that every student should have a laptop, or what we call a one-to-one program. And we're going to come back out of this, and we're all of a sudden going to be in a 2-to-1 program where the majority of our students will have 2 devices. They'll have a laptop funded by their school, and they'll have a phone funded by their parents. How do we teach in a 2-to-1 world? How do you live in a 2-to-1 world? And I just wonder, looking at you in this room on the screen, how many devices did you bring to this conference? Did you just bring one? Or do you have a phone, a laptop, an iPad, a smartwatch. How many devices did you bring to learn with for these 2 days? Being in a 2-to-1 classroom where you use the device that's appropriate for the time is the future. And sometimes you don't want a device, and that's good too. We're going to see a movement from blocking less and securing more. I know that a majority of schools had Google Meets turned off, and all of a sudden we had to turn it on. And then we had to teach kids how to use it because we could have been teaching kids how to use it already, but because kids might have used it inappropriately, we turned it off. And then all of a sudden we had to scale it up real quick. But do we turn it off once they come back? Or do we understand that learning happens outside of 7 to 3? And can we utilize that technology? Can we utilize the idea of a chat room now that we understand the power of it? So we're going to see this trend where we're blocking less and we're securing more. And we're going to be actually thinking about the tools that we block, the websites that we block through an educational lens, not a what happens if kids do the bad thing lens. Because it doesn't matter what the tool is, kids can do a bad thing. Says the guy that used to throw pencils in the ceiling in the Central Valley Library. Right? We're seeing a trend of condensing and integration of more and more educational platforms. So for example, whether you're Google or you're Microsoft, we're just going to see more and more stuff that is going to be built into these systems. We're just going to get more and more condensed as we move forward. This idea of a cloud integration, the idea that your backbone, however fast of internet that you can get into your school buildings, it's worth every penny. I've never heard somebody say, I wish the internet was a little bit slower. Never heard that anywhere in the world. Whatever you can get into your buildings, get it, buy it, it's worth it. We're seeing a transition in the idea of open campuses being forever changed when learning can happen anywhere, anytime. This was a conversation I actually had with Kevin and a group of some of you here in the room, where we were talking about that some of these, especially rural communities are starting to see some real potential where students can, go do an internship all day and still fulfill your graduation requirements at night. What happens if kids could do an internship during the day and then take senior English at 5 o'clock at night? Because we all know how to do that now. So will that be a possibility? You think about the avenues, this idea of open campus. What does that do for us? How are we going to have to look at structuring classes differently? I think there's some real possibilities there. I think we're going to see coming out of this that online public education being an option for all, not just some, not just a way to make up graduation credits. But we're already hearing from especially late elementary, middle school students and families who this system worked for their kids. It worked for them as a family. And so I think we're still going to see this even when we get to a place where we could all be back in the classroom. Are you starting to think about what online part of your school might be? How would you utilize that? You see, learning doesn't happen between 7:30 and 3:30. We don't need a bell schedule. Learning happens from the moment you wake up, because you wake up and you check one of two things, your email or social media. And the last thing you do before you go to bed is you set your alarm on a connected device. And the same is true for our students. We're going to have to think about new ways of learning without a bell schedule. Some of the most exciting conversations I've been in the last couple of weeks is starting to look deeply at the schedule of learning inside of a school, the structure of learning inside of a school. We have some school districts who during this decided to take on, especially at the high school level, decided to go back to a quarter system. So kids are only doing 3 classes a quarter. And they are getting some pretty good feedback from their students saying they really like only focusing on 3 classes at a time. They get to spend more time with just 3 teachers. They get to go deeper. And so we have some schools that are coming back and say, well, maybe when we transition back to full in-person, what would that look like? What would it look like if we kept this idea of office hours so that there was time during the day where students could go and have office hours with teachers that they need extra support with? We're seeing some school districts who didn't have advisory programs starting to really understand the power of advisory, whether from a distance or face-to-face. So I think we're going to have to relook at our schedule. What are you learning? What are you hearing? What's working? What's not working? And how do we teach kids the skills of learning, not the skills of following directions, which is also an important skill, following directions. Right? We're going to see a trend to move towards video and audio teaching as a new normal for all educators. We all know how to make, hopefully, instructional videos. They are powerful. They allow you to clone yourself. They allow you to meet the individual needs of kids. So we're going to be looking at what are you buying? What I can see in your near future, you're going to be buying some new audio and video equipment for teachers, for kids. We're seeing a transition right now, very fascinating transition, I would say in the last week or two, to moving away from video instruction, not entirely, but looking at that there are some things that are better just as audio. And we have all of these listening standards across the different grade levels. And so we're seeing this idea of podcasts, this idea of audio only, especially if you need to tell a story as a teacher. If you're telling a story, if you're a history teacher, and history is full of stories, instead of telling that story where maybe not all 30 students are ready to listen, maybe you just record that story and now you're on a student's phone and they always have their earbuds in anyways, but now they're listening to you. And then we give them a structure and we teach them the skill of listening as a literacy, the skill of watching a video as literacy. I already mentioned this, but we're looking at this idea of moving from a content-based system of education to a skill-based system of education. I think in the future, CTE programs are going to be critical. I think we're going to see a lot of overlap with CTE programs in the high school. How do you start transitioning those down to the middle school and elementary schools? Or this idea of STEM education in the elementary that leads to robust CTE programs in the middle and high school. I see us transitioning to a true inquiry-based educational system, especially when students, if we go back to that idea of open campus being different, what does it look like when we're true inquiry systems, but kids can move freely in and out of learning as they need it? Because you have this online portal that you can always learn through when you need to. And so I think there's going to be this transition into these inquiry-based cycles, whether in whatever cycle a teacher decides to use based on what that kid needs or what I'm trying to teach. And so as I wrap up, I wanted to share with you some of the stuff that Kevin and I have been talking about. Is we have put together 5 training sessions for teachers that will span between November and March. And you can see there, I put that November 25th date as a question mark because I'm not sure with that one, right before the day before Thanksgiving. But here's what we're looking at. We're looking at network literacy skills, right? Skills for the future generation. How do we search? Right now, one of my biggest pet peeves is teachers telling students to go out and search, right? Go search, go do some research. But we haven't actually taught the skill of research. Like, it's a skill to go out and research. There's a big difference between researching something and looking stuff up. Kids are really good at looking stuff up. People are really good at looking stuff up. But it's a critical skill to be able to research the internet at a deep level. And it's a skill we need to teach. December, we'll be talking about mapping. There is no standard. There is no standard that I can find that says that students can color a map. No standard exists. And we live in a world where this generation will never touch a paper map. So why are we still coloring maps? Instead, we've got this incredible thing called Google Earth. We've got these incredible maps, from open maps to street maps. How are we utilizing those? Geography should be forever changed when you can take students to Morocco, when you can stand at the top of Mount Rainier, when you can visit places that your children or your students never would have the opportunity to visit. One of the things I'm constantly telling teachers right now is if you can't take your students out into the world, how are you bringing the world to your students? Because you have these skills. You have this incredible thing called Zoom or Google Meets. Can you bring the world to your kids? Can you use these incredible 4K high definition things like Google Earth, where you can walk down the streets of St. Louis? You can go visit the beaches of Miami. You can go to the Amazon basin. You can go stand among the penguins in Antarctica without ever leaving your classroom. January will be focused on capture, curate, and create, all around the idea of using video. February will be collaborating from a distance. How do you set up collaboration? Not just from distance learning, but also in classrooms. And then in March, we'll be looking at accessibility, taking advantage of digital spaces. So we're looking at accessibility tools to support all learners. So that's kind of the layout. To make this go, we're going to need a commitment from at least 30 teachers across all of your districts. So think about that. However many of our districts are here with the Rural Alliance, how many teachers could you bring into that fold? But also, as Kevin and I were talking, we wanted to support others as well. So on January 12th, we're having a session for early childhood, which is something I've been doing a lot of. Been doing a lot of work with Head Start programs, which is stretching me. How do you do online teaching to a 3-year-old? If anybody knows how to teach a 3-year-old online, I'm all ears right now, by the way. Talk about struggles. But we're also setting up student summits and an ability for students to come and learn, not just from me, but from others. So on November 10th, we'd like to have a student summit about just showing them who they are as a generation, the generation that forever changed the definition of learning, because they can learn any place, anytime, anywhere, and they need to know they have that power. Then in January, well, you need to be the best problem solvers in history, and we'll cover this idea around searching, around finding problems, solving problems. What does it mean to be a networked individual today? And then in March, teen culture is a game changer, and we want to talk about their culture, their social media, why it is important to them, how do they utilize it for good, not evil. And so these are different summits, and you'll notice down at the bottom, we will also be writing a follow-up guide to each one of these summits so that teachers can take the information that we share during the hour summit with students, and they can take that back to their classroom and continue the conversations. And it will all be based on ELA standards that teachers can take and move back. So if you are interested in that, having your students participate in that, talk to Kevin. We're working out the details on that as well. There's my contact info. Kevin also has it if you need it. I will put this back up on the screen. Kevin, is there anything else that you have questions or comments for me as I go? Here's where you can, if you don't have the chat, here's a link to this presentation right there again. Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, I think we talked about this, but we can record these.
You can record these?
Yeah, I'm asking if you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so part of what we've been taking a look at, I believe, is to, I think we're looking at offering the ones for students on a Tuesday. Obviously, we can record and we'll put them up on our website. I'm going to say this like I know what I'm doing here. We recently did this with our virtual conference with the help here at Northern Quest, and we actually created a YouTube channel. And so we would take these recordings, we put it towards that YouTube channel, and then you would have an opportunity to use that on any day that you wanted to use it. So Tuesday would be the live version, and then it would be there for you. You can say how quick of a turnaround is that going to be? I'll let you know. It was much more difficult in a 3-week or 3-day turnaround of the whole conference than it will be for a session there. So is the student ones? What was the time on that? Is that an hour? I think we just said.
Yeah, hour. I don't know. We can talk about it. I was hoping to get 90 minutes because I like to have the kids discuss and give them some opportunities to ask questions, because usually a lot of questions come up. They don't understand the privacy rights around their social media, and we dig into a lot of that stuff. And they usually have a lot of lessons or a lot of questions around that. But if we need to do 60 minutes because that's what fits into our systems, then we can do that. So.
Okay, and then the teachers was an hour and a half also, correct?
Correct. Yeah, 90 minutes on the teacher sessions. 10 to 11:30 is what we were thinking for a timing on Wednesdays.
Okay, and the reason we picked Wednesday here again is we knew that a lot of districts are doing some kind of professional development on either Wednesday or Friday. Wednesday, that provides us an opportunity to record, and then if you want to use those on a Friday, those will be available. So you can just let us know on any of these what you want to do. And then the other one that we are offering is the one that you're part of right now, which is superintendents. And so we talked with Jeff about doing one in January, let's say one in March and one in May. Does that sound right, Jeff?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. And those can be based off of the conversations that we want to have as we continue through today and tomorrow. If there's a certain direction that we want to kind of point Jeff in as far as discussions, we can do that also. So we'd be open for feedback, whether it's right now or as we go along here on the, the times and then works for you. Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your patience as we got started this evening as far as
no problem
with the start of things, introduction. We're kind of doing some sound checks there. We just appreciate you took the time on a Sunday night, especially to join us. So Jeff will be on Mondays going forward. Tonight was Sunday night just because it kind of had to fit into a schedule a little bit. So going forward,
I got to drive to Connell tomorrow. Lucky me.
You are living the dream. So
yeah, right.
So we'll be in touch. I don't know, questions around the room? Do you have time for a few questions?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I think you mentioned that you had to have like 10 teachers or something to that effect. Would that be including those that are watching the recorded session, or is that just simply the ones that are watching the live sessions?
The goal would be to have about 30 people in the live session. And then whatever that looks like for you, and however many other people you can have doing, behind the scenes. And that 30 is total. It's not 30 per school district, right? That 30 is like, we just need 30 educators across as many school districts as possible because it allows us to share ideas, thoughts, what's happening, what are people doing. We find that to actually be that right around 25 to 30 is where we see, we see great conversation. We see collaboration start to happen as well. A lot of the other work I'm doing is working individually with school districts. And we are finding that, if you can get a solid cohort of pedagogically sound teachers, we can change the system pretty fast. That was the work I was doing before we got into the pandemic, was, supporting that kind of work at the district level too. So if you're interested with that, reach out and let me know too.
Worried that November 25th is not a good day to start. Better to start in December, kickoff, so we have all the time we need to advertise. We know that schools are in session and people are there focused. Might be a better option. I don't know. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I talked to Kevin about this. I mean, I'd be, that next Wednesday, I think it's December 3rd. And we could do 2 in December, kind of like a fast kickoff, or, we do that one in December, and then we do January, February, March, April, on the other end. I will let you guys talk about, you're there, you can talk about what's best, but if we want to do that I'm fine with that. So
yeah, the other conversation is around December 2nd, which is Wednesday, and December 9th, which was a Wednesday.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
December 2nd, I think, is already on the schedule, and I think the November 25th, we were talking about doing it.
Yeah.
December 9th.
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, lots of questions. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Have a great one. Have a great day tomorrow. Thank you.
It is 7:06.
6. So the rest of tonight's was just kind of around conversations with you, what you guys wanted to kind of have around the room. If you want to have conversations on, I guess, I call it issues and concerns, what's going on. topics that you wanted to bring up. Just kind of a sharing type of thing. This is when the guy in the microphone is hoping that you get a little help around the room.
Need to be shorter than 90 minutes. I need some tools to help change their mindset as well.
I think he's gone. I don't know. Yeah, he left. I see.
Okay. That's a good question. How many people have Wednesdays? Professional development days. 1, 2. How many have Fridays? Of course. Yeah.
Kevin, when people are talking, can you give them the microphone?
Okay. So the books that and
opportunity for more teachers to participate. It was in the PM, not first thing in the morning or mid-morning.
okay. So I don't know if you heard this kind of for the virtual group on that one is more opportunities in the PM on Wednesday, Tom?
Yeah, we can do it. So, Wednesdays would be good.
Others, is that PM work better? 1:30 from Odessa. Okay.
This is Sunshine. I put in the chat, we only have Fridays. We have students Monday through Thursday, but we'll see what we can do if that's the date that we need to do it.
Okay, well, I mean, one of the things we can do is, we're looking around the room and kind of having conversations. Friday seems to be a better day in general, at least for this group. I can go back to Jeff. There was a 50-50 chance of picking the right day. I should have known right there. I'm the guy in the grocery store that can't pick the right line, so there's no reason for me to be able to pick the right day on this thing either. So, okay. So back to your question, Dan, on the 30 teachers. I guess part of the hope is, just again, this is a mid-school, high school. For those, is there anybody in here that's involved in modern states? Okay, that's what part of this is around. This is actually kind of where the funding is coming from. But it's a middle school, high school, just so you know that ahead of time. Kind of the hope is that, I guess, people would go in not only with teachers, that they might even go in with, part of the professional development staff. But I know that's what I'm asking because that's, principals have other things that they want to go. All right, so we will talk to Jeff about Friday. I'm right behind you.
So this is important enough that I would figure out how to free, I could free a couple of teachers up. Do we have any money to cover, do we have any money to cover subs if that was an incentive? Is there some way to? Well, I've got plenty of money, but for districts that might need some help, is there anything we could do to support folks?
We don't have anything right now on this. We're actually, so this was based off of, it's in the Modern States grant. Part of the professional development had about $20,000 in it. And we're using that $20,000 for him with teachers, students, and superintendents. We're probably pushing it right up there to the very end of it, I think. And then, of course, as you know, grants are written in a certain way, and that was not part of what was written into that. So.
But we would commit to 2 or 3 people on all those days, just even half day subs.
Okay. Right. So for the virtual, it's just kind of around the room that folks are basically stating that they can find 2 or 3 teachers that they can commit to do the Wednesday if we can't change it. Maybe what we'll do is go back to Jeff and say, hey, split it, go Wednesday, next one Friday, Wednesday, next one Friday. I don't remember, to be honest with you, and this is my conversation, if we talk Fridays at all. My guess is I think we took a stab at Wednesday because of course that was the day that I was understanding most people were using. So we'll go back and see what we can do on Friday. Any other conversation piece? Somebody want to start a conversation around something? We have like 8 of them still.
I just have one that's been bouncing around my mind, and I brought it up a couple of times, and this is with the spacing. Because we're trying to get more kids in classrooms, and when you have school classrooms that are under 800 square feet, you're limited to about 14 to 15 kids you can get into a classroom. But when you have classes where you need to be able to get spacing for 20, yeah, everybody keeps saying think outside the box. So mine that I've been bringing up is if we could cut, right now, if a student comes up COVID positive, every student within 6 feet around them would also have to quarantine when they're in their cohort. If we move that spacing to 4 or 5 feet, the same students would still have to quarantine, but the next row of kids would still be at least 8 feet away. And so that's where I've been starting to ask that question. Why can't we scoot it down into 4 feet, even 5 feet? You figure a classroom, you move every desk or every student over a foot from where they are now. That's going to add, anywhere from 7 to 8 more kids that you can get into a classroom. For me, that'd allow me to get everybody back. In the meeting with Spokane Regional Health this last Wednesday, of course, all heck broke loose the next day with them, but there was a issue that was brought up the other day by a superintendent that looking at the state guidance where it stated if you can't get to 6 feet, then use barriers. But we couldn't find I'm not sure where exactly he found that. Spokane Regional Health wasn't necessarily biting on it. That was something new. But even if we could get to something like that, that would really help out the schools that are getting more pressure to try to get kids in safely.
Well, the one issue I found with that was with L&I, that they're saying that the employees, they'll fine you $5,000 or whatever. So because originally, and I have a benefit, I was able to fit everyone in 6 feet apart, but we tried to do 4 feet. And they said on behalf of the union, they would file agreements with L&I on behalf of their teachers. Anybody on the Zoom that has a comment that they would like to make about anything?
So Blake has brought back preschool through 5th grade. 6th grade started this last week, and 7th and 8th starts Monday. Starts tomorrow. So I will click in and out as I can, but I'm excited to have all of my middle school students back in the building. One suggestion I would have, if you have a room that you don't have and you have an extra space, was you could have a pair with those kids on Zoom, and the teacher is still there. There's still somebody there to help them if they need it. So streaming the classroom. And that's something else we're doing, is streaming classrooms. Middle school did it. The 6th graders did it this week, and it went really, really well. And let's just hope we don't have anything crazy happen. We have had 2 naked moms right now in their bra and panties forget their kids are on Zoom and walk across the screen. So we're going to hope for no more of that nonsense. But other than that, all is going well.
At least you have any naked kids.
No naked kids, just moms that forget that the Zoom is actually on and we can see them. So
I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago. AWSP was presenting, and Scott from AWSP mentioned a study nationwide that 40% of administrators in the nation are considering leaving the profession at the end of the school year. Then he said that the same study was done in the state of Washington, and it was 60%. And so one of the things I wanted to know is, what are we doing to help support our principals through this, so that we don't lose them, because we know how hard it is to recruit good people, and what are we doing for ourselves so we don't leave? I need ideas.
They work through July, like they're, so I had them timesheet all that, and then one day a month, they're taking a day off, and I'm filling in for them. It's like a self-care day. And did that this month, and it seemed to go over pretty well. So I don't know if that's a great idea or not, but just to go and sub for them, so they got a day off. I'm trying to do that once a month. I don't know if that's a good idea.
So I did email you something from Impact Schools. Here it is, speaks to professional development. Chuck, I sent yours to Wilbur. I believe was the email I sent there. Todd, I sent yours to, I believe, Lamont email. But they give a pretty good description on the professional developments, and then they also have the days and times. And we did try to stagger theirs between Wednesday and Friday. Theirs is elementary. So it's K6, K5 best practices. We're going to get ready to send that out. So if you get a chance to take a look at that, you can provide some feedback, maybe tomorrow in our discussions. So as I went through, or as I was listening to Jeff, I can pull this up. I just put in a few different things that he talked about. This is kind of more from a rural IS standpoint, with some things that we might be able to do as far as supporting you. We can absolutely, if there's an interest, look into schools creating partnership around satellite networks. Okay. That totally makes sense. It's, that's something to take a look at. Kind of going right along with that one, just out of curiosity, who has infrastructure needs as far as, I would say more on the other wiring, being able to handle the students or the devices that you have. And actually, I'm thinking, Eric, you may not know this, but you may now. A couple, 2 or 3 years ago, I know Reardon had some real issues. There may have been 3 or 4 issues years ago within the community and in the school district, and they had to do some, I want to say, some bouncing off of some kind of, I'm going to say satellite or something. They had to do some kind of setup to actually get Wi-Fi within the community. And I think it's been taken care of. It's more of that type of infrastructure as far as you're at with any of your wiring needs, or if you have needs that you're going to have with the more that you're doing online.
So what I need to know is, I need to know what this, I'm not sophisticated enough to know whether the satellite still uses the same pipe that we have coming in Perry County. The issue with Perry County is no redundancy in that pipe is full. And there's tons and tons of fiber, but all the fiber is dark. And we've got a new provider. Zipley is now providing Perry County, but they're, whether they're going to turn on some of that dark fiber is still debatable. So as much as anything, I think my need is to have somebody who really knows what's going on help us to develop a plan. We had Brad Smith from Microsoft, president of Microsoft, in the community. He's committed to, when he was the president, he was committed to helping Perry County move forward. We've got the initiative from the Stevens County gal. What's her name? She's been to several panels. and she's helping. But I've also been told, doesn't matter how much you put through there right now, we just don't have the capacity. We get a forest fire and that set amount of bandwidth is going to be sucked out by that communications piece. So really, rather than the infrastructure, I guess I need somebody to look at what we can do. What do we really need in a small school district? That makes sense.
We know the guy. Let's see, one of the things, I don't know if Jerry's still on, but if he is, you can hear this part, drones. So I guess if that's an interest, I'm assuming it could be, is thinking along the lines, if we do have some STEM projects, is maybe we need to take a look at a drone project that we go with that. So that's not really whether you want to do it. I would think that that'd be something that might be of interest. If we had a grant, we were looking for participants, my guess is we could probably find some within this room. I don't always follow him on the art, math, and data class, but we can take a look at that. I mean, I understood the $92,000 a year starting pay. That came across pretty clear. I don't necessarily understand how the art and the math combine, and how they use it, but we can take a look at who's doing that, because that may be another one that can be offered. Instructional videos. Like I said, I was trying to put some things down that kind of made sense that we might be able to help you with. Is anybody doing instructional videos? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Usually I'm doing instructional videos. Summit Valley, and our reason to go there is smaller. Okay. Okay.
Jeff mentioned advisories. I would strongly recommend that everybody look at some way to do class meetings or advisories during this process as part of the social emotional learning standards and that outreach. And that may be something that we could look at on a more global basis of what programs we might be able to help folks implement.
Any other conversations? Tomorrow morning, let's go back to the Cowboy. So tomorrow morning breakfast starts at 7:15. Our 8 o'clock conversation piece had to back out at the last minute. And that was around financials. But I also know that there's a few of us, John and Dan, and Steve and myself, Minerva, Kim, I'm trying to think who was all in Chelan. We were having some conversations around financials, and it was more along the lines of what we could do to kind of help each other from around the financial pieces, maybe taking a look. You hate to use the word audits, but how you can support. Let me give a better example. Dan currently is going into, and he may have been in some of your districts, going into districts and taking a look at CTE programs. And just real quickly, maybe talk about a few things you're looking at that will help my conversation.
Yeah, so I think we have 15 school districts, and I've counted about 10 so far. And again, it's just looking at programs to see if compliance, if they're maximizing funding. So I'm going in and I'm just, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying, hey, these are the things you may want to tweak. These are the things you need to fix. And CTE I've been doing since, it's been 30 years now. So that's one of the things I feel pretty strong about. So I'm just helping out the smaller districts that don't have full-time CTE directors. And I think we can do a lot of that stuff with rural lands. I mean, there's expertise in special ed that my school district may not have, or Laffer, Tyler, or I think Campbell. Those are the things that we're helping out. We also talk about finance, because there's some people there that are stronger in finance. This hasn't been. Others maybe didn't have all those hats that they've worn over the years, and they're starting to learn those things. So it's just a matter of looking out for each other and helping each other out. CTE, getting some great going into some of these school districts, and there's a lot of cool things they're doing. I'm thinking, geez, I wish I would have done that. Even though I've been doing this for 30 years. So it's just sharing ideas and how we're utilizing our staff. So that's what I've been doing the last 2 months.
So our conversations were kind of, as Dan mentioned, kind of taking a look at and having a conversation around where we can support each other. And maybe even who that person might be if there was a person that could come in and help. ESDs used to be able to do some of this and provide some of their financial people that could come out. They'd come out and spend a little time in the district and kind of support and see how you're doing things and provide a little checkup. And my understanding even from ESDs is there's just a shortage in one, the financial area. And the other one is there's just a lot of other things going on. And so really tomorrow morning, just be a conversation around the finances, how to take a look at where you might be leaving money on the table. Maybe even taking a look at where we are able to collaborate more as an organization. Giving you an example. Remember when High Cap used to be was it an I grant? And at some point we had districts that just weren't even taking the money just because it cost you more to go get the money and have somebody do some of the things than the money that you're receiving. We had just received permission from OSPI that we could create a consortium of schools to use that. And then they put it in place again. And so, you just think, is there other programs that we could take a look at that, that we could use that might help maximize the finances if we were using it as a group of schools. And so anyway, that's what tomorrow morning is going to be as far as kind of a trade-off for our presenters that couldn't be here. So breakfast 7:15, 7:30, and then we'll probably kick off somewhere around 8 o'clock. I haven't seen a sheet yet. That's exactly right. The last thing you need to do is come down here. So that was part of your gift card. Is
We will have coffee and water.
so you do have you have the little coffee place that does have some sandwiches and different things, oatmeal and things like that. Assuming Epic's open, that's probably about it. I think they're the only places that are open on that. So yeah, do not come here at 7:15. Go get breakfast and then come here. Thank you, Kim. So, and then Epic is open. Is there any issues with cards? Everybody get a card? Okay. Perfect. Everybody had a room? All right, we're rolling. So, we're going to start here. What time's my agenda say? All right, 7:45 opening remarks. You're not going to want to miss those.
Yes, please. Thank you.